Are you ready to dive deeper into Tolkien's world? If you've ever struggled to read the Silmarillion, I've got just the thing for you. I've created a free guide packed with my best tips to help you conquer this epic book. Whether you're a seasoned reader or tackling it for the first time, this guide will make your journey through the first age of Middle-earth more rewarding than ever. Head over to ringspodcast.com to download your free guide today. Your adventure deeper into Middle-earth starts now. Visit ringspodcast.com today for your free guide. Not long ago, I nearly missed out on a line from Tolkien's letters that has since become a North Star for me. Written to a friend in the midst of World War I, decades before The Lord of the Rings was published, Tolkien wrote, quote, "We had been granted some spark of fire that was destined to kindle a new light, or rekindle an old light in the world." Isn't that why we keep coming back to Middle-earth? Not just for battles and wizards and elves, but because somewhere, in those stories, a forgotten light flickers back to life. Today I want to do something a little different. I'm setting aside my usual chapter-by-chapter guides and reading walkthroughs to share with you 5 moments that reshaped my journey with Tolkien's world. 5 turning points, each one sparked by a book that Tolkien did not write, but that changed the way I see him and his stories forever. Some are obscure, some are indispensable, and one of them, well, it quite literally made me reroute my daily walk through a university bookstore just so I could stare at maps of Middle-earth. So if you've ever wondered how far the road wanders, what secret gates you've passed before, then this episode is for you. I'm Aaron, and this is Lore of the Rings. Remember to subscribe and share. Now, let's wander. If you have followed this show for any amount of time, you know how big of a fan I am of going directly to the source material. Almost every single episode that you find on Lore of the Rings, I am pulling directly from Tolkien's published works. The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion. I love getting down deep into the primary source material for The Lord of the Rings. Only after engaging with the primary source material do I feel like I can then go out and look at secondary commentary on Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings. So what's special about these moments and books that I want to share with you today is that not one of these was necessarily written by Tolkien per se. They are all secondary material, but these have become trusted companions on the road of guiding through Middle-earth, where I have found true insight and power in engaging with the content in these books that have completely transformed the way I look at Tolkien and his stories. As I mentioned before, Tolkien's line about kindling an old light nearly escaped me. But let me tell you about the winding path that led me to that line. Years ago, I was invited by a friend from work to go to a Carl Jung Society event. I loved and studied Jungian theory, and hearing someone speak about Tolkien and Jung sounded like a dream come true. So of course I had to attend, and as I listened to the speaker, I was totally enamored with everything she was saying. Right after the speech, I went right outside and bought her book right then. It's called Journey to the Imaginal Realm by Becca Tarnaz. I had the thought to invite her to be a guest on the show and to share parts of her speech on the podcast, but there was such a big crowd around her that I couldn't even get close. Eventually, I had to leave without being able to talk with her, but I found her website and used the contact page to send her a note. And a day passed, and a week passed, and 2 weeks passed, and I never heard from her. I realized later, as I look into it, that I had put in the wrong reply email address on the contact form. I felt so sheepish about this that I completely dropped the idea of having her on as a guest on the podcast. But lo and behold, she did some investigating work on her side, and she reached back out to me. We were able to arrange an interview, and you can find that in episode number 135, Tolkien's Imaginal World. Go to ringspodcast.com/135 to find a direct link to that. Also, you can hear her favorite passage from Lord of the Rings in episode 200, ringspodcast.com/200. I have chills remembering some of the insights that she helped me to see in Tolkien's works. In fact, that line about a new light being rekindled became a guiding principle for this podcast because she shared that insight from Tolkien's letter with me. I had not read that before, I had not heard it before, and when she shared that, quoting it practically right off the top of her head, it sent chills down my spine. So, moment number one comes from Journey to the Imaginal Realm by Becca Tarnaz. That conversation with Becca and that beautiful line about rekindling an old light, it cracked something open for me. And it made me realize if you really want to understand Tolkien's world, you have to go beyond the books and listen to the man himself peer into his thoughts, as it were. And the place to do that? It's in his letters. As you read the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, especially in the revised and expanded edition, what you find is that your appreciation for Tolkien's genius goes from deep to absolutely phenomenal. Now, in the letters, we don't have the letters that were written to Tolkien that he's responding to or replying to. We do get a little bit of commentary from the editor about some context of some of the letters, but we just really have Tolkien's direct letters. The very first letter is a letter to his soon-to-be wife, Edith. And later on in World War I, he sends many letters to friends. One letter that I particularly love is a cover letter for a job application to be a professor. Even Tolkien had to apply for jobs. As you read through the letters of his life, you get a sense of appreciation for just the way that his mind worked, not only in storytelling, but in languages, in his career, in his relationships as a husband and father, as a Christian. Another insight is that he was just so busy. He had so many setbacks in his life. So many things were challenging to him, whether that was just pressures of his career, family complications, health complications. He had so many things on his plate. And it really makes me grateful that we actually do have The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and as much of the Silmarillion as we do, just simply because he had so many challenges that he was dealing with. Reading these letters gives me a new respect for Tolkien as a person. But I start to wonder, what inspired him? What ideas and obsessions and ancient stories were rattling around in his mind when he started creating Middle-earth? That's when I stumbled across a book that answered a lot of those questions for me. Introducing The Making of Middle-earth by Christopher Snyder. Now, if nothing else, this book alone will be a beautiful addition to your Tolkien bookshelf. The hardcover is black, it has gold and silver inlaid in it, just like the gold and silver two trees of Valinor. There's a sword here on the front, there's a forest, there's, it looks like Mount Doom, there's a Nazgul, you can see Minas Tirith, the White City with golden rooftops, there's hobbit holes, looks like the Shire. The cover of this book alone is enough to justify purchasing it and putting it on a shelf, even if you never read it. But the beauty actually doesn't stop there, as this book is full of colored photographs of places where Tolkien visited, Tolkien and his family, artwork, and other things that inspired Tolkien. The book starts with a fairly concise biography of Tolkien's world, and then it goes through his major works, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, and The Lord of the Rings, and it doesn't necessarily give a chapter-by-chapter breakdown or guide, but looks at some of the sources that potentially inspired Tolkien. For example, I really did not appreciate Tolkien's academic career as a medievalist and philologist until I read The Making of Middle-earth, and I could really start to see Tolkien as a medievalist and start to see how that inspiration trickled down into The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and even the fairy story that I think The Hobbit really is. So if you've ever wanted to dig into what might be some of the source material or inspiration behind some of the ideas of The Lord of the Rings, then The Making of Middle-earth by Christopher Snyder is for you. Learning about Tolkien's medievalist brain and his love of languages was fascinating. But then there's another part of me. The kid who would pore over fantasy maps for hours. And be honest with me, if you are a Tolkien fan, then you probably have a thing for maps too. Which brings me to the next book, and the one that I was convinced for years I would never actually own. Early in my career, I worked at a major university, and in visiting that bookstore one day, a friend of mine who knew that I liked Lord of the Rings pointed out a book to me, and it is The Atlas of Middle-earth by Karen Wynne Fonstad, a source that I have pointed to many, many times on this podcast. I was fascinated and a little bit skeptical. What fascinated me was the maps. I love maps, and that even led me to a childhood ignorant tenet of truth I developed that was that any good fantasy story had to have a map. I'm sure you're nodding along if you know what I mean. We love to look at the maps that go with fantasy books. And then here it was, a book full of maps, and maps only of Middle Earth. Journeys of the elves in the first age, the movements of troops in the second age, the migration of hobbits all throughout the third age. You can compare the journeys of Bilbo and the dwarves versus Frodo and the hobbits as they make their way from Shire to Rivendell. You can see all these things, and it really puts everything into context. And what I really love about this is Tolkien was so meticulous about his maps and his timing, the phases of the moon, the passage of time as it moved through. And he would calculate by hand. There were no calculators at the time, where at least they weren't readily available. But he would calculate by hand distances in which people could walk or ride on their pony or sail in a ship or whatever. And he would track these out and try to create accurate maps. He and Christopher would pore over maps for hours, going back and forth, sharing notes. And so to have the Atlas of Middle Earth that just has all of these wonderful maps and extra notes and beautiful things in context, it really is an invaluable resource for anyone who loves Lord of the Rings, and especially if you're coming from the films and reading the books for the first time. The Atlas of Middle Earth is absolutely fantastic. That's the fascinating part. The skeptical part for me when I first found this book was I thought, who is nerdy enough to actually buy this thing? Which I laugh about now because here I am a few years later, 200 episodes into a Tolkien podcast. I've recommended this book many, many times. I was convinced I would not ever own this book or buy this book. But the funny thing is from that first encounter of me finding the Atlas of Middle Earth in that bookstore, I found myself walking between classes, and I would take a quote unquote shortcut through the university bookstore just so I could spend a minute or two leafing through the pages of Atlas to Middle Earth. A shortcut to mushrooms, obviously, in the Fellowship of the Ring was not a real shortcut for Frodo and his friends. And likewise, this shortcut through the university bookstore to look at maps caused me to be late to several university classes more than once. I finally gave in and bought it, by the way, years later, and I still get lost in those maps. But even after all that, the letters, the backstory, the geography, I realized Middle Earth still had mysteries I could not explain. And that's where this final book comes in.
Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my side softer?
Can I make my side firmer? Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. It's the Sleep Number Everything Smart Bed sale. Every smart bed and base are on sale during our Memorial Day event. Up to 50% off, plus free home delivery. Limited time. Exclusively the Sleep Number store near you. Learn more at sleepnumber.com.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
It's a collection of Tolkien's later unpublished notes, and it answers one of the questions I've been carrying with me since I was a kid. This book is The Nature of Middle Earth, edited by Carl F. Hostetter. Now, a simplified origin story for this book is that Carl Hostetter was working with Christopher and helping him to edit several of his father's notes and stories and academic papers. Christopher had a portfolio, a folder essentially of photocopied notes and manuscripts, some of them handwritten, some of them typed, that J.R.R. Tolkien had written up. And Christopher simply handed those to Carl Hostetter and essentially said, make of this what you will. Carl was able to decipher some of that. He ended up editing a few of these and publishing them as various separate essays. But what this book is a collection of those manuscripts printed for the very first time. There's things in there that not even, if you've heard of the history of Middle Earth, that is a 12-volume set. That is a massive set of material that Christopher Tolkien published after his father's death of manuscripts and drafts and alternate things. And it's amazing and it's comprehensive. And I haven't even dug into all of that. I've barely even scratched the surface of History of Middle Earth. But Nature of Middle Earth is a much shorter read. I think it's more tightly edited by Karl Hostetter. It really digs into some really fascinating things about the nature of Middle Earth. How does the nature work? A lot of the essays deal with time and aging and how the elves would age and how the Numenorians would age. If you have an elf who lives immortally, how do they age? At what age do they become an adult? If you have a Numenorian whose lifespan is 5 times longer than normal humans, what age do they become an adult and how do they age? These are the sorts of questions that Tolkien would wrestle around in his mind. And again, the beautiful thing is there's charts. He's got very detailed calculations of the timing of the trees and the setting of the sun and how the years work, how many years pass between certain events. But not only is it nature in that physical sense, but also in what is the nature of the beings of Middle Earth. There's a lot of different essays and manuscripts about elves and their bodies and their spirits, and what is the nature of bodies and spirits when they're together and when they're separated. But to take a step back from the insights themselves, I want to read to you a little bit from the foreword of this book and help you see one of the things that I absolutely love that this book is essentially an answer to. Karl Hostetter mentions that Christopher handed him this collection of manuscripts, and then he goes on to say, quote, "All of the materials in this bundle are concerned to some degree with linguistic matters, but as is often the case in Tolkien's post-Lord of the Rings non-narrative writings, the linguistic matters that occasioned each essay led Tolkien into long, seeming digressions, either because they explained the historical, cultural, mythological, and/or metaphysical situations that various words and phrases reflect, or simply because Tolkien wished to pursue some idea or point that occurred to him at that time. Despite this technical and undeniably dry accounting, they nonetheless contain many interesting details of historical and cultural significance." All right, so what is Carl saying here? He has these essays of Tolkien writing about the language, the evolution of language in Middle Earth, the philology of it all. And yet Tolkien would be writing about language and then completely digress and deviate into some cultural significant thing or some event that happened that led to why the language was changed or why a word means a certain thing that it is. But what's fascinating to me was just Tolkien was trying to get these languages out of his mind. And as he said before, these languages came first and the story would come after. So it's almost as if he was like discovering this world as it revealed itself to him as he was trying to articulate these languages. And these digressions that he gives in these essays, I find them just so fascinating. The culture of certain things, the lore of certain things, events that you just don't find anywhere else. And it's in one of these digressions that I found an answer to a haunting riddle that I had had since childhood. The riddle was this: as Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli and the Great Company, as they're passing through the paths of the dead, they find a skeleton. They find the bones of a man scratching at a door that was closed, and they lament that this was one of the princes of Rohan who had left many decades or centuries before and had since been lost and never returned. And they finally found him and found his fate. And then they move on as they're trying to get their way to the harbor. But that little moment stuck with me. It haunted me as a kid when I read that. I just wanted to know what was behind that door. It's the paths of the dead. And here is a door in a mountain where the living are not allowed to go, and yet somebody has fashioned a door. What is behind the door? Did this Prince of Rohan who died there, did he know what was behind it, and that's why he was trying to get through? Was he just lost and trying to find an escape? I don't know. And this riddle haunted me for years, ever since I was a kid. But only just a few years ago, when I was reading through The Nature of Middle Earth, in an essay called, Of All Things, The Rivers and Beacon Hills of Gondor, did I find an answer. Now, the rivers and beacon hills of Gondor, that's where Tolkien is literally writing out, here are all of the beacons of Gondor and their rivers, and he's writing about geography and a little bit of history of these places, and yet he has a little diversion about Sauron in the middle of that essay that completely blows my mind and gives me a potential possible answer to what was behind that door. Now, yes, I'm going to be a mean podcaster. I'm not going to tell you what the answer was that I found. If you want to find it, you can go read the essay in The Nature of Middle-earth, or go back and listen to episode 68, The Ghosts of Rohan, to hear the answer that I provided there. This is what I love about this world. No matter how many times you read the books, or how many editions sit on your Tolkien bookshelf, there's always one more door you haven't opened yet. To quote the poem The Road Goes Ever On from the Fellowship of the Ring, quote, "Still round the corner there may wait a new road or secret gate, and though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way, and take the hidden paths that run towards the moon or to the sun." In the worlds of Middle-earth and the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, there is always one more light waiting to be rekindled. Thank you to this episode's executive producer, The Old One. If you would like to support the Lore of the Rings podcast, visit ringspodcast.com/member. If you found today's wandering of Middle-earth to be inspiring, please share this episode with a friend. Lastly, if you would like to connect with me, I am most active on Threads. Find a link to my profile at ringspodcast.com and tap the @ symbol near the top. And thank you for wandering Middle-earth with me today.
Don't miss the biggest Maytag sale of the year at Lowe's. You'll find the Maytag appliances you need when you need them at a great price. Plus, when you buy 2 select laundry appliances, you'll get up to a $100 bonus via instant rebate. Shop Maytag at Lowe's. We help, you save. Offer valid through 5/31. See store for pricing and offer details. Advertise savings on all major Maytag appliances through maytag.com and participating retailers. Prices may vary. Additional terms and conditions apply.